Thanks, worship team. Thanks, Carrie, for filling in for Susan and for our team for just doing a great job. Susan's on vacation with her family this week. It's good to be back. Thank you for showing Young hospitality last week. If you were here last week when he was filling in for me. He'll be back next week. I'll be out of town again. My brother-in-law passed away Friday morning. So Marcia and I will be traveling down there for that service, and then I'll be hanging around for a little while and helping my sister sort out some things that she needs some help with. So just pray for her, pray for our family as we just kind of go through this. I also want to ask you to pray for folks in our church. Amy Fitzgerald is out of Inova Fairfax Hospital and is over at their rehab center doing well, getting her strength back. She'll probably be there a couple of weeks before she gets to go back home. But we're just thrilled that she is doing as well as she is. She was in very serious condition. So thank you to everyone who prayed for them. Thank you for those of you who supported her and Morris and their kids and visited. It's a real testimony to our small groups here and how her small group has really stepped in a significant way. We want to pray for Carolyn Stilling, who continues to do dialysis every week, and she can't be here on Sundays because she does that on Saturdays. We've got folks recovering from surgeries. Kathy Crawford had knee replacement. She's doing well with that. My wife Marcia had an outpatient surgery on her hand, and that's all going super well. So just pray for her. Pray for Don and Diane. Don's got some medical tests coming up in the next week, so just pray for them as they have that going on as well. So let's just go to God in prayer this morning. God, we thank you that the words of that song we just sang are so true, that your love is amazing, that it's done such incredible things for us. And we just want to lift up people that we know, people that we love, people that we care about, whether it's our family, our friends, people here in our church and in our small groups that are just struggling with various things, whether it's grief and loss or medical conditions and questions about that and tests being run and surgeries and recovering and all of that. So we just pray that you would just meet each person and each family, each caregiver just right where they are and just sustain them and give them everything that they need during these moments. I pray for folks who are struggling with relationship things and people who are dealing with issues with their jobs and at work, maybe with their kids and their families or whatever's going on. We just want to lift all of those situations up to you. And then, God, we do want to just stop and thank you for just the blessings in our lives, the blessing that we have for the country we live in, for the opportunities that we have, and may we always recognize that those things come from you and that you've entrusted those to us to do something with. Now, God, I pray you'd open our hearts and our minds as we look into Scripture and just teach us the things that you want us to know. In Christ's name I pray, amen. I do want to mention just one thing before we jump into our series this morning. We are looking for some volunteers. This is that time of year where volunteers are, some folks are moving kind of out of the area and getting relocated. Volunteers are shifting around and taking on some new responsibilities. So we're just looking for some volunteers. If that's something you want to think about doing, if you're looking to serve somewhere, we'd love to talk to you about serving in our hospitality ministry, which is greeting people and setting up coffee and helping people find their way and all of that. We can always use help there, or just showing up once a month or every few weeks with some goodies to share with people out on our hospitality table. Our kids ministry, student ministry, our safety team and security team. So lots of opportunities to serve right here on Sunday mornings. And as we think about volunteers, we're also showing some appreciation this week. Our appreciation table, volunteer appreciation table, is back up. That'll be up and down throughout the summer months. And that is just your opportunity to walk out there on your way out, grab a card, grab 5 cards, grab 25 cards if you want to, and just write a note of appreciation to somebody. We've got a list of our volunteers, kind of the areas they serve, their names, and all of that. So take some time to show them some appreciation on your way out as well. So we are in part 6 of our Survivor series, and we're going to finish up this series today. And as we do, I want to talk about something that happens quite often sometimes in the game of Survivor, and it definitely happens in the game of life as we live our lives. And it's this idea right here of what goes around comes around, right? What goes around comes around. What goes around comes around, and the powerless, right, all of a sudden find themselves in a position of power. Or what goes around comes around, and maybe the people who hurt you, now they actually need something from you, right? There's a lot of examples from the game of Survivor. But one of my favorite examples comes from season 23. In fact, I was rewatching season 23 a few weeks ago with my daughter. And there's a guy in season 23 by the name of John Cochran. And he just goes by Cochran. And John Cochran is an awesome guy. He's just a super nice guy. He's a smart guy. And he's in a tribe. There's two tribes this particular season that are competing against each other. And Cochran's in a tribe full of, if you want to go back to high school, this is the only analogy I can come up with to describe his tribe. It's full of jocks and pretty people. Okay? You remember these groups, right? I was not part of either one of those when I was in high school. Unfortunately, I married one of those, and she wasn't a jock. She was one of the pretty people, thankfully. But anyway, so he's in this tribe, and he's not that at all. He would describe himself as kind of nerdy. He's really smart. He's really intelligent. He's also very sociable and just a likable guy. But because his team just mistreated him the whole time. They gave him a hard time. They blamed him for things because he wasn't athletic when they wouldn't win some of the competitions. And they really just came down hard on him, kind of made fun of him a little bit and all that. Well, fast forward to about halfway through the season, through the game, when both of these tribes now merge into one tribe. And so it kind of becomes an individualistic game at this point. You're competing against everybody. But when they merge, they are dead even, right? It's a 6-6, right? The original tribes are each at 6 players. And when they merged, it's not unusual in Survivor for those tribes to still have some really tight bonds and kind of stick together even after they merged into one tribe, and it's essentially an individual game. And so that's what these two tribes did. In fact, I'm not sure there's been a time in Survivor when the tribes weren't more committed to their original tribes than in season 23. And so they get to tribal council, and they're both committed to voting for somebody from the other original tribe, which means they're going to tie the vote. And the way Survivor works, if you tie a vote in tribal council when you're voting somebody out, the way a tie works is when there's a tie, the people who tie, they can't vote now, and the rest of the tribes, they have to vote for only one of those people. They can't vote for anybody else at that point. Only the people that were voted for originally and tied are up for vote. And they take a second vote. And if there's a tie on the second vote, they go to rocks, what they call going to rocks, which means those two people who got votes are no longer in the mix. They're safe. And everybody else has to reach into a bag and pull out a rock, and whoever pulls out the white rock is out. So it's very risky. They do this because they want to force players not to allow ties, right? And so they're committed, both tribes, they're committed to going to rocks, right? Which is risky because you may pull out that rock. And they get to the first vote, and sure enough, they tie it up. And there's two people who are tied. And so they go to a second vote. And Cochran, he's thinking, I don't want to go to rocks. I don't want to risk. And I certainly don't want to risk for these people who have basically abused me and mistreated me, and I'm on the bottom with them. And so he changes his vote. And he votes for somebody from his own tribe, and he breaks the tie. And his original tribe are furious with him. They get back to camp, and they're angry, and they're furious, and they're just giving him, I grew up in the South, they're giving him what for, right? And one of the other tribe members, a young guy by the name of Brandon, who had kind of gone to Cochran and said, hey, we'll treat you nicer than they do. Come on over to our side. He jumps in, and he looks at that original tribe of Cochran's. He said, this is why he did that, because this is how you've treated him. And he was essentially saying to them, what goes around comes around. And that change right there cost most of those people the rest of their game. What goes around comes around. And like I said, this happens in our lives too, right? And that we find sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we didn't have much power, but now we do. And the people who have hurt us, now maybe they need something from us. And how you leverage that power, how we leverage that power when people who hurt you need you, how you leverage those moments, it says more about you than almost anything else. And so as we think about that, I want us all as followers of Jesus, I want us to be ready for that. I want us to be ready for those moments. So we're going to look at a story this morning. It's all the way back in the beginning, back in Genesis chapter 37. And before we get there, I want to give you the backstory, because this is one of those what goes around comes around kind of a stories. And I want to give you the background of the story. It begins years and years earlier with a guy named Abraham. And most of us, if we grew up in church, have heard about Abraham. God spoke to Abraham one day and he said, Abraham, you're going to become a family, and you're going to become a huge family, and then your family's going to become a nation, and it's going to be a great nation, and I'm going to bless the entire world through that nation, through your family. And Abraham and his wife, Sarah, they had to wait a long time. They were in their 80s and 90s when God promised them this. They didn't have any kids, but they finally had a son by the name of Isaac. And eventually Isaac, he has two sons. We talked about them a couple of weeks ago. It was Jacob and Esau and Jacob. But it doesn't really look much like a nation at this point, because it's just still a very small family. But then Jacob has 12 sons. And all of a sudden, a family is on the verge of now having some tribes. And suddenly, it's on the verge of maybe in a few years, those tribes growing into a small nation, certainly by ancient standards. But the interesting thing about this story is that the entire promise to Abraham, God's plan to bless the entire world, including us, through his family, the entire plan ended up hanging by the thread of one person, and how one person would handle his what goes around comes around moment. And in fact, the entire plan could have easily just fallen apart. And based on one single sentence from this one single person, as we're going to see. And that one single person was one of Jacob's sons, and his name was Joseph. And now Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, because he was the son of Jacob's favorite wife. Jacob had two wives. He had a couple of other women that he had children with. And here's one of the takeaways for today. Men, never have a favorite wife. Okay? Just never do that. Okay? It will just cause so many problems for you if you do that. And it caused so many problems for Jacob and for Jacob's family, because he had a favorite wife. Her name was Rachel, and she had two sons, Joseph and Benjamin, but she died in childbirth when Benjamin was born. So Jacob was constantly mourning his favorite wife, and because of that, Joseph became his favorite son. Benjamin would have been his second favorite son. Now Benjamin, he's too young at this point to even be in this part of the story. But Joseph, he has these 10 other brothers, and scholars think they were all older brothers. And so he's got these 10 older brothers who just resent Joseph. They just can't stand him because they knew their father loved him more than he loves them. And so as the story goes, and like I said, if you grew up in church or if you're Jewish, you're familiar with this story. Well, one day Jacob, the dad, he sends Joseph out into the fields, way away from home, because his brothers are out taking care of their flocks. They're herdsmen, and so their flocks are out grazing somewhere. And so Joseph, he goes out, and Joseph, as he's approaching his brothers, they can see him coming for a long way away, because I don't know if you remember, his dad gave him that coat of many colors, so he was easy to spot, right? So they see him, and they start talking, and they're like, you know what? We've had enough of this guy. We're tired of him being the favorite. So they end up, making a long story short, I'm blowing through a lot of details. They take Joseph, they rip off this coat of many colors that represented his father's love, this special coat, and they throw Joseph into this empty pit, into an empty well. And they decide, hey, let's kill him. Let's just kill him and just get him out of our lives. But before we kill him, let's sit down and have lunch. Right? It just doesn't make sense, but that's what they do. Here's what the text tells us. As they sat down to eat lunch, right, they looked up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And Ishmaelites were like nomadic people, traders. And then the text says this, that one of the brothers, Judah, he says to him, he says, what's it going to gain us if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? He says, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. I mean, it's just a flood of compassion coming from Judah here, right? Let's not kill him. Let's just sell him into slavery. After all, he is our brother. He's our own flesh and blood. So they pull Joseph out of this pit. He's probably scared to death. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He sees these foreigners. They're speaking some foreign language, and they tie him up, and they sell him. They sell their own brother to these slave traders. Now Joseph, at this point, he's 17 years old. He's just a teenager, really just a kid. And he's being sold to these slavers. He doesn't know who they are. He doesn't know where he's going to end up. He doesn't know who's going to end up buying him and what they're going to purchase him for. And so these slavers, they head off with Joseph. The brothers wave goodbye because they know they're never going to see him again. He doesn't know if he's ever going to see home again. And then the story continues, and it tells us that Joseph had been taken to Egypt, and he ends up in Potiphar. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials. So Pharaoh was head of Egypt, and he was the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. He bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And then perhaps, probably one of the strangest parts of this story, in fact, this is repeated throughout the story of Joseph if you read the whole story. It's kind of the theme of the story of Joseph. In the midst of all of this bad stuff, in the midst of all this chaos, the writer tells us the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And we read that and we think, no, if the Lord had been with Joseph, he would be back home with his dad, right? He would be back home, and these 10 brothers, they would be the one stuck in Egypt because Joseph hasn't done anything wrong, while the brothers they're getting away with this horrible, horrible thing. I mean, if God is with someone, doesn't good things happen to them? And throughout the story, we see this theme that God was, in fact, in some mysterious way, he was with Joseph, looking out for Joseph all along. And what's really fascinating about this story is, and it's one of the takeaways, I think, for us today, is that Joseph chose. He chose to live as a man who God was with. That Joseph decided to live his life as if God was with him, rather than living as if God had abandoned him, even though that's the way it looked. Well, eventually Potiphar, he notices Joseph, and he realizes that Joseph is this very talented person. He's got some administrative skills. He's really smart. He seems loyal and all that. And years go by, but eventually Joseph is managing Potiphar's entire household. He's put in charge of everything that Potiphar owns. And Potiphar, he wasn't the only one that noticed Joseph. Potiphar's wife also noticed Joseph. And one day she comes to him and she basically says to him, she says, slave, because, I mean, that's what he was, right? She says, slave, I require your presence. I want you to sleep with me. And that wasn't a request, by the way. That was a command. Slave, I own you, and so I can tell you what to do, and this is what I want you to do. And for the first time, perhaps in her entire life, she got no for an answer. And Joseph says, he says, look, your husband, he has put everything he owns in my charge. He has entrusted me with everything that is his, except you. And I can't do this. I cannot do this. He says, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Well, this just continues. She continues to pursue Joseph, and he keeps running from her advances, and eventually she's just had enough, and she accuses Joseph of trying to assault her. And when Potiphar hears this, even though I'm not sure he believes it, it's kind of difficult in the context, but when he hears this, he has no option. And so we're told that he took Joseph and he put Joseph in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And then again, the writer comes back to this theme, and he says, but while Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with him, to which we'd say again, how? Now, see, if God had been with him, you're not in prison, because aren't good things supposed to happen to good people? And if you're faithful, isn't it all just supposed to work out? The text says then that God showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So eventually, Joseph essentially becomes somewhat of an administrator in this prison. He's kind of over all of the prison now and kind of the assistant to the warden, and because he's got all these administrative skills, and he's talented and he's gifted. And well, the story goes that Pharaoh's cupbearer and Pharaoh's baker, the guy that made his bread, they fall out of favor with Pharaoh, and they get thrown into the same prison. And these two guys, they end up meeting Joseph in prison, and then years go by, and one day they wake up, and Joseph can kind of tell that something's wrong. He can kind of tell that they're both kind of down, and so he goes to them and he says, what's going on? And they basically said, we had these dreams, and we've been talking about these dreams, and we don't know what the dreams mean, but the dreams were so vivid and so detailed, we think they mean something, and we just don't know what they are. And so Joseph says, hey, tell me what your dreams are. And so first the cupbearer, he tells Joseph his dream, and when he finishes, Joseph said, hey, I've got some really good news for you. He said, in 3 days, it's going to be Pharaoh's birthday, and he's going to restore you back to his service. He's going to take you out of prison, and he's going to restore you, and you're going to be his cupbearer again. And then Joseph says, and by the way, when they free you, remember me. You know, when you get out of this place, make sure you tell them that I'm here, that I don't deserve to be here, that I was kidnapped and brought from my land, and I was accused of something I didn't do, and I don't deserve to be here. So remember me and help me out. So the cupbearer, he's sitting here and he's watching this, and he's thinking, absolutely, if this interpretation comes true, then absolutely, I'll remember you, Joseph. Well, the baker hears all this, and he's getting really, really excited because that was really good news. And he goes, hey, what about me? What about my dream? So he tells Joseph the dream, and Joseph says, I got some bad news for you. You're not going to be restored in 3 days. In fact, you're going to be executed. Well, sure enough, 3 days later, everything happened just the way Joseph said. The baker is executed. The cupbearer is put back in place. And a day goes by. Joseph is probably thinking, maybe today is today, right? Surely the cupbearer has told somebody they're going to be coming for me. And then days go by. And then weeks go by. And then months go by. And the next thing you know, the cupbearer has forgot all about Joseph. And for some of us, I mean, that's just the way life is, isn't it? Or at least the way it seems, that we just feel forgotten sometimes along the way. And years go by, and years go by, and for all Joseph knows, this is just going to be the rest of his life. But day after day, again, he continues to live as if someone that God cared about, to live as if God was with him. Now, Joseph is 30 years old at this point, and Pharaoh, he has a series of dreams, and they're so disturbing to him, and these dreams are so vivid, he's sure they mean something too, and so he calls all of his wise guys in, his court magicians and counselors and all this, and he tells them the dream, but they can't figure out what it means and come up with an interpretation. And then the cupbearer who's there, he remembers, and he says to Pharaoh, he says, today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. He said, remember you were once angry with your servants, and you imprisoned me and the chief baker and in the house of the captain of the guard. And he said, each of us, we both had a dream that same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. And now a young Hebrew, Joseph, was there with us, a servant of the captain guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly, he says, things turned out exactly as the interpreter said they would. And I was restored to my position, and the man was impaled. He was executed. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. And when he'd shaved, they had to clean him up because he's a mess, right? And when he'd changed his clothes because he smelled like a dungeon, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said that you, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph says, I cannot do it, but God will. God will give Pharaoh the answer that he desires. And so Pharaoh tells Joseph what his dream was, and Joseph pauses, and then he explains to Pharaoh the dream and what it meant. And he says to Pharaoh, he says, what God is saying to you through these dreams, he says, Egypt is going to experience in the next 7 years an extraordinary years. These are going to be years of abundance. There's going to be so much grain in Israel that you're not going to know what to do with it. And people from all over the world are going to come to buy the grain from Egypt. And you're going to make all of this money and all this. He says, but after that, after 7 years, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And the famine is going to be so bad that everybody's going to forget about the 7 good years. And so that's the interpretation, Pharaoh, of your dream. 7 years of prosperity, 7 years of famine, at which point Joseph should have stopped talking, right? Culturally, he should not have said anything else. But Joseph, he does the unthinkable. Joseph begins to give Pharaoh advice. And I imagine everybody else in that room probably gasped when he started doing this, because you do not give Pharaoh advice unless Pharaoh asks for your advice. And Joseph is standing here, and he still probably smells a little bit like the dungeon, right? So who is he to be given advice? But he leans in and he says, Pharaoh, here's what you need to do. says during the years of plenty, you need to designate certain cities around Egypt to be grain cities. And you need to build these grain silos to store this grain. And for the next 7 years of abundance, you need to tax the people 20% of the grain, and you need to store it and collect all of that grain. And then Joseph tells Pharaoh, he says, look, this is going to be such a huge undertaking. You need to put someone in charge of this to make sure this ball doesn't get dropped. Because if it does, it's going to go bad for Egypt. Someone needs to wake up, he says, every single day for the next 7 years, thinking about this problem and working this problem and preparing Egypt for what's about to come. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, he says, can we find anyone like this man? One whom is the Spirit of God. And by the way, when the person in the room is asking you a question, and you know the answer they want you to give, and you know that person thinks that they're actually a god, you just nod. You just nod to the answer that they want. And so that's what they did. So Pharaoh says to Joseph, since God made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all of my people are to submit to your orders. The entire country is to submit to you. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Joseph is now the second most powerful person in Egypt and probably the world at that time. He makes him basically the governor, the prime minister. And Joseph, he gets to work. I mean, he's got all these skills. And I mean, he trained in Potiphar's household. He did what he was told to do. He trained when he was in prison and learned from that experience. And he gets to work and he organizes a city and he gets these storehouses built and they start collecting this 20% tax grain. And then the rain stops 7 years later and everything dries up. And sure enough, that famine hits. In fact, it got so bad, just like Joseph said, that nobody remembered the 7 good years. And so they began to feel the effects of the famine. And it reaches all around the world, not just in Egypt, but all the way to Joseph's family. And says this, when Jacob, so this is Joseph's father again, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? He continued. I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die, so we don't starve to death. So Jacob's sons, Joseph's brothers, these 10 guys, they load up and they head to Egypt, and the stage is set, and things are now reversed, aren't they? And like I said at the beginning, sometimes what goes around comes around. Now, Joseph was the governor of the land, second most powerful person, the person who sold grain to all its people. And apparently his brothers, they show up that particular day in the very city that Joseph just happened to be in, overseeing this grain distribution. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be as strangers. And the brothers don't recognize him. They didn't recognize Joseph because he's 30 years old now. And the last time they saw him, he was just a scrawny 17-year-old teenager. And who's going to think it's even him, right? They think he's dead, and now he looks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. I think that was a song somewhere along the way, wasn't it? But the last thing they probably heard was Joseph crying as he was dragged off to Egypt, begging them not to sell him to strangers. And so they just erased it from their minds. And now they're in the presence, again, of the second most powerful person in the world. So here's the question that we all have to wrestle with as we think about this story. And some of you haven't wrestled with this yet, but you will at some point. And we need to be ready as followers of Jesus. What will you do? What will you do when you've got the power and when your actions and when your words determine the destiny of someone else, particularly the destiny of your enemy? What happens when things turn around? What happens when what goes around comes back around? And the answer to this question, it really depends on what you do with your anger and your bitterness when it all hits. And if you're still dragging it around when this happens, you will most likely be like the people that you don't like. And as his brothers were bowed down before him, I imagine a lot went through Joseph's mind, right? I mean, those first days and nights traveling with those Ishmaelites, not knowing what was going to happen to him, where he was going to go, who was going to buy him, and what they were going to buy him for. The prayers of desperation that seemed to go completely unanswered. Standing on that auction block People walking by, looking at him, trying to decide what he was worth and what he could do. The lie that Potiphar's wife told about him, he ended up in prison when he didn't deserve to be there, spending years being forgotten by his friends that he helped there. And right here in front of him, bowed down in front of him, are the men responsible for all of that. And I encourage you to read this whole story. There's so much detail that we don't have time to look at today. But months go by, and his brothers, they have to come back to Egypt because they need more grain, and they still don't know it's Joseph. He hasn't told them. And this time, when they show up, he gets them in a room with all of his attendants and guards. And then he does something that just completely freaks the brothers out. It says this: then Joseph could no longer control himself before all the attendants. And so he's getting emotional. He knows what's about to happen, and he cries out. He says, "Have everyone leave my presence." And suddenly, his brothers are alone with this guy who's the most powerful person that they've ever met. And they have no idea what's going on. And Joseph said to his brothers, he'd been waiting for this for a long time. He says, "I'm Joseph. I'm your brother." And when they heard those words, I can't imagine the terror that went through their minds, because they expected Joseph to do unto them what they had done unto him. And they expected to be executed immediately, or worse, sold into slavery. And Joseph said, "Is my father still living?" That's all he cared about was dad. Okay. What's going on back home? He has no idea what's going on. But his brothers were not able to answer because, again, they were terrified in his presence. And again, they were terrified because of everything that was going through their minds, what they had done all those years ago. They probably never forgot about it, and what was going to happen next to them. But they didn't need to be terrified in the presence, because Joseph, he had lived his life as if God was with him during those difficult years, and he kept bitterness and anger at bay. And what Joseph could not know was that God's plan for the entire world, it actually hung on the thread of how he would handle this moment in his life. That before him sat 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel that were going to become this great nation that God was going to use to bless the entire world through. Because Joseph, he was able to forgive his brothers because he didn't carry around a bunch of bitterness and anger, even though he had every reason to do so. Joseph has them stand up. He embraces all of them, and he instructs them. He says, "I want you to go home. I want you to get dad. I want you to bring him back. I want you to get your families. Move everybody here, because I'm going to take care of you for the rest of your lives." And that's what he does. And years go by, and eventually Jacob, the father, dies. And when that happens, the brothers are terrified again, because they're thinking, dad's gone. Now he's really going to get his revenge. And this moment he's been waiting for. And the writer tells us his brothers came and they threw themselves again down before him. And he says, "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid." And here's the question that you are going to have to ask yourself at some point in your life. When you're in one of these what goes around comes around moments, and now you have the power and someone needs something from you. Joseph says, Am I in the place of God? Not am I God. I know I'm not God. But am I in the place of God? And here's what we need to understand. You will never experience the good that comes from the bad in your life unless you recognize God was with you during the bad, and then refuse to play God when things are good. Joseph said, "You intended harm for me, but God intended good to accomplish what is now being done." And he had no idea what God was going to do moving forward. The savings of many lives. "So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. So here's what I want to leave you with as we wrap this series up and as we wrap this text up. One day, you may have the power. You may have the power over the person or the people who took from you, who hurt you, who harmed you in some way. And in those moments, you'll remember what they took from you. And you'll remember what they did to you. And in that moment, your Heavenly Father is going to invite you to remember something else as well. He's going to ask you to remember who it was that was with you. And in that moment, you have a decision to make. What will you do? What will I do? What will we do when we've got the power when we've got the power to determine the destiny of our enemies? And will we choose to pay them back? Or will we choose to pave the way forward? Your decision will not be determined by what happens then. Your decision will be determined by what you do between now and then. It will be determined by the perspective that you're able to maintain between now and then. And it will be determined by what you do with the anger and the bitterness that you experience between now and then. And I hope that you will take your cue from the one who gave you life and not from those who took life from you. From the one who was with you and the one who has never really abandoned you. And if you do, in that moment, you will be like your Father in heaven, and you will be free like you've never been free before. So let me pray for you. God, thank you for this story. God, as horrible as the details of this story are, as tragic as so much of it is, so much wrong was done, so much hurt was done and experienced. I thank you that we have it that we can learn from today. I thank you that Joseph chose to live his life, even though he couldn't see you work, and he chose to live your life as if you were. And he somehow was able to move past anger and bitterness when everybody could have justified him showing anger and bitterness. I thank you for the forgiveness that he extended to his brothers. I thank you that it paved the way for your plan to be carried out in this world so that we could be here today. And God, I pray that we would live that same kind of lives. As your followers, I pray that you would give us the strength that when people hurt us and damage us and mistreat us and abuse us, that somehow we would recognize you're still with us. And somehow we would be able to keep anger and bitterness from just infiltrating our lives and damaging us more. Help us when we have the opportunity in those what comes around goes around moments. Help us to take the higher road. Help us to take the road that you would call us down and to forgive and to move on. In Christ's name I pray, amen. Hey, don't forget to check out our table outside and just write a quick note to our volunteers and appreciate them. If you want to find out more about serving in some of our ministries, our hospitality ministries, our kids, student ministries, what have you, see me, shoot me an email, check in with Anna outside. She'd be happy to help you figure that out as well. Hope you have a great week. Let's stand and sing one more time.